Hey there, Mike Robbins here, and I am going live here today on our StreamYard platform, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube. So hopefully everything is broadcasting as well as possible. We had a few technical glitches the last time I tried to broadcast on all three platforms, so let me know if you can see me and hear me. If you are joining live, feel free to chime in with comments because I would love to hear from you. Let me know where you are, how you're doing, and if you're watching the video of this afterwards, you can also leave some comments below. I usually take a look at those afterwards and will respond as I can. So today I want to actually talk about something a little challenging to talk about, but super important, and that is the election. So we have a presidential election coming up here in the US 2 weeks from today. As I am coming to you live at this moment, it's a little after 1 p.m. Pacific time on Tuesday, whatever the heck the date is today, the 20th of October, I believe. And our presidential election is already actually underway here. Hey, Deirdre, good to see you. Oh, you're in Canada. All right, well, hope things are good in Canada. Sharon, Hudson, Massachusetts, nice to see you. So our presidential election here in the US officially happens, or sort of ends, I guess you could say, on November 3rd, which is 2 weeks from today, a Tuesday. But in many states, people are already voting. We already voted. We vote by mail, absentee, but we got our ballots and filled them out and drove them to the county office and dropped them off actually a couple weeks ago. So I want to talk a bit about the election, not so much from a political perspective, although I'm happy to share my own perspective. And I know some of you are joining from around the world, so what's going on? Hey, g'day from Sydney, Australia. Stephanie, good to see you here in the Bay Area. But I've been personally feeling a lot of angst and a lot of fear about the election myself. Some excitement, some anger and frustration. Seth, good to see you, man. Hope things are good in Buenos Aires. But you know, this is something here, whether we're on LinkedIn or we're on Facebook or even on YouTube, whatever platform you may be watching this on. You know, there's obviously a lot of political commentary that happens on social media, as well as, you know, on various different platforms of media. So at this point, whether you're an American or not, you're probably aware of the fact that we have a pretty big election happening here. And the question that I have, so here's something that's come up for me recently, and I want to sort of explore this in the context of the work that I do around authenticity and teamwork and building relationships and finding common ground. You know, I wrote my book, We're All in This Together, which came out in the spring. And, you know, the primary focus of that book, and I've talked about it here on a series of lives that I've done over the last number of weeks, and the 4 different pillars in the book. And the primary thrust of that book is really about creating a culture of high performance, trust, and belonging, which is a lot of the work that I do with great companies like Google and Wells Fargo and Microsoft and LinkedIn and eBay and, you know, IBM and Cisco and on and on and on, lots of different great big companies that I'm honored and grateful to get to work with. But one of the reasons that I felt really inspired to write this book, and I knew it was going to come out in 2020, and I wanted the title to be We're All in This Together. I had no idea it was going to come out in the midst of a global pandemic. I had no idea it was going to come out as well as we were entering this time of intense reckoning, social reckoning, racial reckoning. You know, I knew that things, as I was writing the book last year and came up with the idea even the year before, the country here in the US and in different places around the world was feeling incredibly, hey Meredith, good to see you, glad you're joining, incredibly divided and divisive in a way that I hadn't experienced, at least in my lifetime, not that it was a new phenomenon, but it seemed like it was coming to a fever pitch. And my sense was that putting a book out in 2020 in a presidential election year here in the US called We're All in This Together, the secondary reason that I wrote the book and wanted it to come out was like wanting to inquire into and talk about how can we find common ground with each other when we're different, when there's division and disconnection. And it seems to me, as we're leading into this historic and incredibly intense and divisive election, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, if we learned anything from 2016, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, the experts and the polls and the numbers all point in a direction that it looks like Joe Biden is going to win the presidential election, which I voted for Joe Biden. I'm hoping that he wins, significantly hoping that he wins. But I did something over the weekend. I went and looked back at some of the numbers just over the last few presidential election cycles. And I found just something interesting. I'm actually going to pull them up on my end so I can look at them more specifically. But like looking at the election results over the last number of election cycles, I think I went all the way back to the presidential election of 1960, where John F. Kennedy barely won the election over Richard Nixon. But just in terms of sheer numbers, like in 2016, Hillary Clinton got just less than 66,000 votes, and Donald Trump got just less than 63 million. So there was a 3 million vote difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the election because of the Electoral College, and he won a number of states. And won pretty significantly, 304 to 227 in the Electoral College. But just in terms of pure numbers, almost 66 million people voted for Hillary Clinton, almost 63 million people voted for Donald Trump. In 2012, 65.5 million people voted for Barack Obama, and 60.5 million, there was about a 5 million vote difference between Obama and Mitt Romney, who he ran against. And in 2008, Obama got a little less than 70 million votes, and McCain got just shy of 60 million votes. So again, it was about a 10 million vote difference in both of those elections. This is the popular vote, right? But just thinking about this election, now we don't really know what the turnout's going to be. There's a lot of turnout, obviously, early because of the pandemic, because of concerns about the post office and other things that we've, been hearing and reading about. Understandably, we always vote by mail, but we've never voted by mail the day we got the ballots and then driven them in. So what we're hearing is the early vote numbers are huge. People are showing up to vote early, which is, I think, a good sign. Ultimately, we don't know what the overall numbers are, but safe to say, I would assume at least 60 million people are going to vote for Donald Trump, and at least 60 million people are going to vote for Joe Biden, give or take. Now, who's going to win? I don't know. And one of them could get more votes than the other, like last time, and the other one could still win just based on our system. But the reality, and the reason I'm sharing all of this, not that the numbers are so specifically relevant, but the reason why this is important is because there are going to be millions of people in the country who vote for the candidate that doesn't win, that isn't president. So either Donald Trump is going to be president again for another 4 years, or Joe Biden's going to be president. And even though I know I'm probably getting ahead of myself because there's a lot of work to be done, there's a lot of, on both sides, depending on your political persuasion, I hope that you've registered, that you voted already. And if you haven't voted already, you have a plan to vote. That's super important. But my question is, how do we interact with each other in these next few weeks, in the days and weeks past the election, which is one of the things I'm feeling nervous about? Like, how's it going to go with the vote count? So much communication coming from Donald Trump about it being rigged and him not, trusting the process, and people being concerned about the process for all different types of reasons. So the question then is, how do we navigate through this? I had something in the last week or so. I found out a couple people close to me that, I know not everybody shares my politics. I don't expect them to. I know not everybody votes the same way that I do in this election or any election. But I was surprised by how upset I got knowing that a couple people close to me were planning to vote for Donald Trump. Again, I'm assuming about 60 million or so people, give or take, maybe more, maybe less, are going to vote for Donald Trump. So it's like, but I had to really confront within myself, why am I having such a strong reaction? How am I going to interact with people? Lots of people have voted for different candidates than I voted for in the past. And while I may disagree, or I may have had strong feelings at the time, I can't ever remember feeling this strongly about it, and also feeling this nervous about it. And I don't think I'm alone, even for people who have different politics than I do. The nature of how we engage with media and information and what's going on is so different and challenging. Maybe you had a chance to watch that great documentary, I think it's on Netflix, called The Social Dilemma, which is all about social media. And so I got a new iPad actually this week, and just set it up and went on YouTube, and I wasn't signed into my account, and I hadn't watched any videos yet. And I noticed the videos it was recommending for me were very different than the ones that I was, used to seeing sort of in my feed. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Because again, it's an algorithm. They try to, what does he like to watch? And so it's going to feed me more of those. But how does that then influence the way that I see things based on the videos that I'm watching on YouTube? I like to think that my information and media diet is diverse enough that I'm hearing different voices and different perspectives. But the reality is we all live in our own little echo chambers to some degree on social media, and depending on where we get our news and information from. That said, right, Justin, to your point, the division seems scarier than who actually wins. Look, I do think, for what it's worth, again, my perspective strongly is I really hope that Joe Biden wins. I think there's, elections have consequences. They have impact, whether it's related to, court appointees, whether it's related to who's running the different departments in the federal government, whether it's related to the bully pulpit that the president has, both related to the economy, related to, in this case, the pandemic, to social injustice, to healthcare, to immigration, to all of these issues that matter to us. And again, I think we can have healthy debates about these issues from a policy perspective. That said, to your point, Justin, how do we get to a place where we can start to heal some of the divide, that we can start to come together and find common ground with each other, human to human? And the only way that I know how to do this in my own life, not related to politics, but just related to the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years, is, hey, Rachel, good to see you. Laurent, good to see you as well. Christine, sorry, nice for you to join. Is for us to be real, is for us to be authentic with each other, to lower the waterline on the iceberg, to get real, to be honest, yes, but to remove our self-righteousness, to add our vulnerability. One of my favorite quotes is from Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, we have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them. We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them. Think about that, right? And Sharon said, because we have the time and good reason to plug into politics, normally I put my head in the sand. Until then, need to vote for the platform and your values. We need to talk without fear. Yeah, thanks for saying that, Sharon. I think, look, what's challenging is to try to understand, one of the things that I have said from the beginning of the Trump presidency, in my experience, and I'm somebody who's paid attention to politics for a lot of my life, growing up in the family where I grew up, where it was very important. I got my degree at Stanford in American Studies with specialization in race and ethnicity. And so politics and what's going on politically, socially, has always been important to me. But one of the dynamics that tends to happen, at least in America, and especially the last number of presidential election cycles, things get really, really heated as we get closer to the election, right? Things get more tribal. There's an irrationality that I'll acknowledge with myself. It becomes us against them, my team against your team, my person against your person. And then the election happens and somebody wins and somebody loses. And usually the side that wins, hey, we're happy that our person won, yay. And the side that loses, we're upset and disappointed and maybe angry. We've had a couple of elections. You think back to 2000, where it got really contentious and Al Gore got 500,000 more votes. But in Florida, it was so close in the recount and all of that. And then George W. Bush got elected by a very narrow margin in a controversial way, or, Hillary in 16 getting more popular votes or whatever. I mean, when there's a big win on one side, it's often not that it's easier on the losing side, but it's like, well, when John Kerry lost in 2004 to George W. Bush, I was personally disappointed. My wife, Michelle, and I had worked and volunteered on that campaign and gotten involved. But, it went the way that it went. And usually what happens is whatever president, whether it's a new president or an incumbent president, he, or at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future, she will come out and at least in rhetoric and with intention, try to bring the country together in some way, whether it's authentic or not, whether they really mean it or not, whether they're really operating that way or not, as opposed to, hard to say, but that didn't happen in 2016. And it felt like the campaign kept going. And so both sides seemed to dig in more and be more angry, and there was more animosity, and it just kept going. It's like we've been in a 4-year-long presidential campaign cycle that never let up. And then you add on top of it the pandemic and all the stress and all of what's going on. You add on top of it the social unrest around racial inequality. So there's so much going on right now. We're swimming in a stew of intensity, right? I mean, even some of your comments, right, Justin, your neighbor who has no less than 10 Trump signs, never seen quite the hatred and fervor in my lifetime anyway, right? There seems to be an intensity, right? And then, Christine, we discover so much fake news, what's being unearthed involving the FBI, the Biden family, and how despicable the left is, right? So right there, as you can see, depending on the way we look at things, depending on the sources of news and information that we get, depending on how we, right, look at things and address things, one of the challenges, and especially in this environment, this social media environment, how do we discuss things with each other in an authentic way about how we really feel, about the concerns that we might have? We can go point, counterpoint, we can go tit for tat, we can go this thing versus that thing, as opposed to just realizing, right, there are many things. And one of the things that I would invite all of us to do, Justin, you, Christine, you, right, Stephanie, I appreciate you can barely speak to your mother anymore because she's 100% in with Trump, right? It's hard. We have people that we know, we have family members, and it's challenging with some of these things to really be able to talk openly and honestly and authentically with each other. It doesn't make sense, right? And when I hear comments from different people, or oh, the right is terrible, or oh, the left is terrible, or oh, Trump is awful, or oh, Biden's too old, whatever it is, it's like, we're all entitled to our opinions. Absolutely. The challenge is we're not all dealing with the same set of facts. And that's becoming increasingly more challenging. But more importantly, if we go back in time, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, there's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, there's no CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, right? There was still division and disconnection and strong feelings politically from the beginning of civilization. And so then the question becomes, how do we find common ground with each other? How do we find a sense of mutual respect and understanding? Now, one way to do it, not the most authentic way, is just not talk about it. Right? Just not talk about it. I won't go there. And many of us choose that because that can seem like, even here, I'm doing this here. You're watching this either on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on YouTube. People often, I've seen comments and recently, no politics on LinkedIn, right? Because again, people, it's like, I don't want this to turn into Facebook where everyone's sort of yelling about their politics. And I get that. But it's like, can we talk about it at work? Well, now we're working in this weird way. That's hard to do. Can we talk about it with family? The holidays are coming up. And so those are often, maybe we won't be getting together this year because of the pandemic. But the question is, how do we navigate through these next couple of weeks? How do we navigate through the weeks right after the election? How do we navigate as we move forward? How do we treat each other? How do we respect each other? How do we tell the truth, speak our truth without criticizing other people for their own experience? You know, one of the things I've been saying, right, I wrote this book, We're All in This Together, and people have been asking me, are we really all in this together? Really? And I think, yes, we are. And at the same time, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And so the way that it looks from my boat might be different than the way that it looks from your boat. Even if we have similar views and beliefs, because you have a different life experience than me, you have a different worldview than I do, you've had a different set of, right? And then some of those things can be obviously very different based on our gender or our race or our age or where we live in the country or how we were raised or where we went to school or church or synagogue or not, or, you know, the influences in our lives, depending on, right? I mean, I'll give you an example just so you get a sense. So I grew up in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area. It's a pretty liberal, progressive part of the country, right? I remember being in elementary school. I was probably 7, 8 years old. And some kid said, on the playground, we were playing something, my dad's a Republican. And I remember when he said that, I think what I said to the kid was, I don't know what that means, but I know that that's bad, right? I mean, you shouldn't say that out loud. Like, not around here, that's not okay, right? And I think about that now and sort of laugh about it. But again, just given the environment in which I grew up, in my house, but in the city of Oakland, in the Bay Area, right? The connotation of what it means to be a Republican is negative. You could go to other parts of the country, especially now, and I think it's only gotten more intensified, and say, oh, I'm a Democrat, or I'm a liberal, or I'm a progressive, or my politics are far to the left, and people, right, I would have a reaction simply based on that, right? Is it Laurent? I hope I'm saying your name correctly. You talk about, you know, you can go into a conversation trying to change minds, use your empathy to seek perspective and understand why people have these thoughts. Most beliefs have the same foundation of values, right? Our children, legacy, freedoms, and to connect on those values and seek their perspective. That's really great. But, and to Stephanie's point, so true. And then really hard for a lot of us, myself included, sounds like for you as well, Stephanie, not to get triggered, especially these days when it feels like, again, I have a feeling many of us will have a different perspective after the election versus now, depending on which way it goes. Let's be honest, right? If we feel more threatened, as most of us may feel to some degree, a fear of, I'm voting for this person or I'm voting for that person, it may not go the way that I want it to go. But to Laurent, your point, I think one of the things we have to remember is that most of us, the vast majority of people, I believe, are good. And the reasoning behind their decisions, whether it's voting for president or voting for anything, comes from, as Laurent's talking about, our children, legacy, freedoms, values, things we hold really important to us. And it's hard sometimes to understand that someone can feel really strongly in a different way than we do. So the challenge is, how do we find that place of common ground? And again, it's not about agreeing with people or condoning necessarily, but it is about understanding, being curious, trying to understand where people are coming from and why. And then ultimately, the difference between self-righteousness and conviction. Self-righteousness is, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm good, you're bad. I'm superior, you're inferior. That creates disconnection, separation. The natural response to self-righteousness is defensiveness. Conviction is, I believe this to be true. I'm willing to engage. I'm willing to speak up. I'm willing to have a sweaty palm conversation with you. I'm willing to challenge you. I'm willing to debate. I'm willing to really go there. But I have enough humility, enough self-awareness to realize a couple of things. First of all, I might be wrong. Right? One of the things I found, by the way, when I was looking at the presidential numbers, remember I looked that up over the weekend? I didn't realize this. I mean, maybe because I'm only 46 years old and this was before I was born. But in 1968, remember 1968? Now, I was born in 74, but in 1968, Dr. King was killed and Bobby Kennedy was killed when he was running for president. He was most likely going to get the Democratic nomination. He died. Hubert Humphrey got the Democratic nomination in Chicago at that incredibly contentious Democratic National Convention where there were riots and there was all kinds of chaos and violence and right. I've seen the videos. Maybe some of you are old enough to remember that, but I wasn't alive yet. But in my recollection, Humphrey ran against Nixon and Nixon barely won, which is what happened. But what also happened was George Wallace, the former governor of Alabama, I believe, he also ran as a third party candidate and he got 10 million votes. George Wallace is the guy who stood in front of the University of Alabama, stood in front of schools protesting against integrating the schools. I mean, that's insane. That seems insane to me. Now, I don't know. I mean, the 10 million people who voted for George Wallace, many of them have probably passed away. I would assume a few of them that are still alive might still be proud of their vote for George Wallace. But my hope is that many people looking back on that will go, I regret that. I regret voting for a segregationist. I think I was on the wrong side of history on that one, to me. But so conviction is believing in something. I'm willing to speak up. I'm willing to take action. I'm willing to take a risk, but I have enough humility, enough self-awareness to realize I might be wrong, maybe in hindsight. And then if I can't acknowledge I might be wrong, can I at least acknowledge maybe there's other ways to look at this thing that I can't currently see? So for those of us passionately voting for Joe Biden, or maybe just equally, if not more passionately, voting against Donald Trump and not wanting him to be president, is it possible that there are people who are voting for Donald Trump who just have different thoughts or beliefs or values or ideas, or there's something in there that says, I have to vote for him, or I feel compelled to vote for him, or I can't vote for Joe Biden and I'm voting against that, or whatever. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. You can debate, you can discuss, you can disagree, you can passionately do so. But when we step over the line of I'm right, like self-righteous, you're wrong, now we create a problem in that relationship. We create a problem of separation, of disconnection. We create more us against them energy. Now, look, I am personally trying to do everything I can in advocating for, in donating money, in using my platform in ways that I can to encourage people to vote, first and foremost, whoever you vote for, but specifically, if you're not sure, which I can't imagine there are very few people that aren't sure at this point, but I would recommend voting for Joe Biden. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why I believe that, but that's my opinion. Now, you may have a different opinion. You may be voting in a different way. You may have already voted, or you may vote differently in the next 2 weeks. We still are all going to be Americans after this is over and have to figure out how to coexist and interact and engage with each other. If you're watching this and you're from somewhere else in the world, the same is true in wherever you live. So the question then becomes, how do we passionately advocate for what we want, for what we believe, for what we think is important, and at the same time respect people's differences, find common ground with one another, and be able to engage, interact, work with one another in important ways in our families, in our businesses, in our society, looking out for what's best for all of us. I think most people I talk to, regardless, Christine, to your point, you can't wait for the election to be over, right? I agree with you. You and I probably have different opinions about why we can't wait for the election to be over, but I think most of us would agree right now, this is not the best moment in American history. We are not living at our best. This is not an ideal situation that we're in with the pandemic, of course, with what's happening socially and racially, with what's happening politically. We've got to figure out a way. We've got to come to a higher place, a higher ground, a different way of operating, because this isn't really working for anyone. And the way that I think, yes, our leaders are responsible for how they operate. Yes, the media is responsible for what it does and says. Yes, social media companies are responsible for how information, accurate information gets disseminated. But I think we're all personally responsible for how we show up in life, for the actions that we take in the next couple of weeks related to the election, for the words that we share here on social media and otherwise, for the relationships that we have, and for us showing up as conscious, productive, authentic, positive citizens engaging in the process and not just sitting on the sidelines and throwing stones, because it's so easy to do that these days, even if they're just verbal stones on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. We literally are all in this together. Like, no kidding. we belong to each other. We got to figure out a way to work through it. Look, if you're anything like me, you're probably feeling scared. You're probably feeling concerned. You're probably feeling overwhelmed, annoyed, ready for it to be over. But let's do everything we can in the next few weeks to advocate for what we believe to be true, to take actions the way we can, to support the process of letting everybody vote safely, easily, fairly, legally. And as we move through this and get to the other side, somehow or another, even as challenging as it's been, or it may not be, or whatever happens in the coming weeks, can we figure out a way to come together? To remember that we literally are all in this together. And look, for some of us, like me, with certain privileges and looking the way I look and being who I am and doing what I do, maybe I feel safer than others for understandable reasons. Laurent, I appreciate your comments, the one you just made right now, and just in general. We've all got to do the best we can to take care of ourselves, manage ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, as well as the people around us, and figure out how we navigate through this tricky time. I'm going to come on next week and do another live. And in the coming weeks, I'll probably be talking about these type of topics, because they're really, to me, there's a lot of other things going on in life, sure. But to me, this is the conversation right now that we have to be having. And ultimately, my hope is that on the other side of this election, we can come together. We can find some more common ground, a sense of healing, a sense of coming together, not just in America, but in the world, because we really, really need it. Thanks so much for joining. Again, feel free, if you're watching the video of this after, leave some comments. Happy to engage with you that way. If you want to stay in touch with me, best way to do that is here on social, whatever platform you're watching this, but also at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. I may put a few links in the comments afterwards so you can stay connected. But I appreciate you joining and look forward to connecting with you next time. Be well. Take care of yourself and those around you. We're in this thing together.